Welcome back to the Marketer of the Day podcast. We are here with return guest Audrey Bell Kearney. Audrey is the CEO of Noise Media Network. They are a media marketing and consulting firm that produces and distributes digital content for clients and helps them get exposure for their business. And Audrey is tapped in to streaming TV, to AR, augmented reality, podcasting, artificial intelligence. So Audrey has Noise Podcast Network, and we're going to hear all about how that is a network of podcasts syndicated across all of the podcast platforms. We're going to hear about Audrey's book and so much more. So Audrey, glad to be talking to you.
Thank you so much, Robert, for having me back. It's been a minute since we've been together, so I'm glad to be back. By the way, how was Lance?
I have not spoken to Lance in about maybe 9 months or so. Sometimes things go. People grow apart, relationships change, but it's for the best. So Lance probably says hi, but it has been a hot minute since I've even spoken to him. So a lot of people are catching up today, I guess.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me back.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you back. So what's on your mind? Because we said right before we hit the record button that you talk all day long, you enjoy it, but there's always so many things to talk about. So what do you feel like talking about? What's kind of off the beaten path, and what's your focus these last few months?
Well, I can tell you, I literally, right before I got on the call with you, I just got off the call with someone from DC, from the state capitol, who represents small business owners for one of our congresswomen here in Georgia. And so he was asking me one of the things, what was something that the small business office out of DC could do for small business owners. So of course I talk all day long because we're podcasting. I said, listen, I host a hyper local podcast 4 days a week live. I said, it would be really cool if you guys could come up with some kind of community partner outreach initiative to help support podcasters who, like me, talk about what goes on in their local area. So he thought it was a great idea. So let's see what happens. So that's what's on my mind, because I literally just got finished talking about that because the Congresswoman Carolyn Bordeaux, she's in Georgia, and he's her small business community manager. And so, for me, it's always about how can we uplift small businesses? How can we uplift podcasters and media professionals? And if there's a way, because there's a lot of money floating around, Robert. Because I'm a podcaster, I get into some rooms and I know that there's a lot of money floating around these states around that we live in. And a lot of people just don't get to know about it. But because I am a podcaster and it opens up so many doors for me, I get access to these conversations up close and personal. And there's a lot of money floating around that could be used towards your podcast, my podcast. You're helping small business owners. I'm helping small business owners and community leaders and small businesses. So, we need access to that. So one of the things I asked for in that meeting, I was like, look, we also need transparency. We need you guys to be transparent, and we need you to tell us where the money's hitting. I feel like I'm a mob or something, like, where is the money hitting, because we know it's there. And he was like, we're going to do our very best to make sure that small business owners and the community outreach partners know that those resources are there and have to freaking access them. That's important.
And that's amazing that small businesses can be able to, in the future, be able to tap into whatever kind of this funding or support is, because like you can imagine that there are probably tons of small businesses out there where just the idea of podcasting is overwhelming. So if they can have like a place to go, a booth to go in, or like money for some equipment or something, or whatever support they need to create their show, I mean, that would be amazing. And, you mentioned politics and government, and like the whole concept of needing to know people and needing to know the right people. With politics, it's sort of exaggerated, so we really notice, but it seems like with small businesses and local businesses, sometimes that's forgotten, right? Like you might have some plumber or some HVAC repair person out there who says, "Ho hum, poor me. What could I say on a podcast?" But I mean, I don't know what your opinion is, but I think that everyone needs to at least be on some amount of podcasts every year, just to at least get themselves out there, just so people know who and what their business is.
Believe it or not, that is so true. And I talk to business owners all the time. I sit on the chamber board, 2 chambers. And so a lot of times they think it's just something. They don't think it can help them. And I'm like, listen, if you know something that we don't know, you can educate people. And guess what's going to happen? When you you start to educate people, when that problem arises, the first person they're going to call is you. So I have a client right now. She's in the security business. Like she trains and hires security officers. And she just could not see how a podcast would benefit her business. I said, if someone goes to look up a security company and they're looking for crowd management, and you have podcast episodes out there about crowd management, guess who they're going to call? They're going to call you, because you are the expert on crowd management as a security company. And so a lot of times you kind of have to just walk them through how this can really work for your business. And once you do that, they either say one or two things: I don't have the time, or I'm afraid of the microphone. Like, listen, one thing about podcasting, nobody sees you. Don't worry about what your voice sounds like. Just do your thing. Because I talk fast. And I know I talk fast. And so, but I'm on video and audio. I'm going to say what I have to say, and it's going to be fast, and it's okay. Some people hate it. Some people love it. That's in anything. And
it does makes sense how someone could be a little bit afraid of their voice or their image being broadcasted out there, but you need to have conversations anyway. If you're that security company doing the crowd management, you're going to need to make that phone call, or you're going to need to meet with whoever at some point anyway. Aren't you in business? And aren't you going to have to talk to someone at some point anyway, or else not get any money? So it's a weird disconnect, right? Because I mean, and things like that are helpful for me to hear from someone like you, who's like very energetic and very outgoing. Just think like, man, she makes it look so easy. She has fun doing this. So why not the rest of us? And even if we had like 5% of your energy, we could accomplish so much.
You really could. I interviewed. So I have 3 podcasts that I host. Sunday, I do a political podcast called Popcorn of Politics. And I interviewed a young lady on Sunday who's running for judge. And so she sent me an email. She said, man, you make this so easy. I was like, listen, I do this 4 days a week live, and then I do it again on a Sunday. So, but it's I make it easy because it's something that I love. Like, you and I produce a whole bunch of content on a regular basis. I love this space, and I said to her in that email, I do this. It seems easy because I love it, and I do it so often. I have right now, my Good Morning Gwinnett podcast has almost 800 episodes. 4 days a week I'm live. I don't do any editing, y'all. So I suck at editing. I don't do any editing, which is crazy. You just get me real and raw every morning at 10 a.m.
Right. And I mean, I'm the same way. I like to be authentic. If I need to pause for a second, or I need to say, why would I cut that out? Because again, going back to, eventually, if you're talking one-on-one to a client or doing a sales call, you're not able to cut that out later. So it's even maybe a good thing to think of it is maybe the podcasting as practice, because I'm sure your first couple of podcasts, Audrey, I'm sure you were super nervous, right? I'm sure you messed up a few more times than you normally would, but you got into the flow, you figured out your system, you put in the hours, put in the time, and then practice made better.
Yeah, that's so true. So I'm gonna give you a quick story. So I started out in traditional radio. And so the station manager, I had a show called the Ask Audrey Show. And I talk fast. So when I would go to the station, I'd be like, Ask Audrey, right? And I'm thinking I'm saying it right. And he was like, it's not Ask. And I'm like, so what are you talking about? It's Ask. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I had to practice saying Ask versus Ask. And he was very particular about words. So for a good 2 or 3 months, he didn't say anything till it got to the point where he just didn't take it anymore. His name was Bob, and he was like, Audrey, it's not Ask, it's Ask. And I was like, oh, okay, Ask. So I thought I was saying it correctly the whole time. So, those are some of the things that you face. You mess up, you keep going. You don't stop, right? You don't stop because it didn't come out perfect. And I know there are some people, Robert, that will bite my head off because I say I don't edit. Yes, I don't edit. But there are some people who edit. They edit everything. I've heard people say they spend 12 hours editing a 30-minute episode. I'm like, oh my God, like that, I would lose my mind. But that's just me. And so the one thing about what we do is that we actually get to do this thing the way we want to do it. I remember going to Podfest for the very first time. I went for the very first time, I think it was 2019. For the very first time I went to Podfest. And the one thing that Chris Cremitso said was, you get to do your podcast the way you want to do your podcast. And I was like, oh, okay. And so the next year I was speaking at Podfest, and I'm speaking at Podfest this year. So, but that was like me saying, oh my goodness, thank you for telling me that, because I was trying to do it the way everybody else was doing. So now I do it my way. I play music. I do the horoscopes. I have a good time. So people listen to my show like, girl, I heard my horoscopes. I've been in situations where I was at a meeting, a political small business meeting, and this guy comes up, he's like, I love you. I'm like, so he scared me because I'm like, well, I don't know you. He's like, I listen to your show all the time. I was like, oh, thank you. So people will get to know you, especially if your show is hyper local like mine, and you don't even know they're watching, but they are watching. Let me just say that people are watching you. They are watching.
Even though you don't always know it, or even though 100% of your audience is not even going to tell you that they're watching, it's the internet. People lurk. And so what you're saying there about having the show the way you want it, I like that a lot, because if you want to choose to be a perfectionist, at least at first, you can. And then maybe if you realize that, well, is spending 12 hours worth it, maybe I can cut that down to maybe 2 hours of editing. That's a decision you can make later if it does not serve you. But kind of your answer there reminds me of like, you can wear whatever clothes you want. You can decorate your house the way that you want. So if someone is visiting your house, you don't have to make any apologies for the way that you decorated it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I play music in my show, and, some people say, well, it's not radio. It's not, but it's the way I want to do it. I love music. And that's pretty much the only time I listen to music, because otherwise I'm listening to a podcast when I'm in my car. So I do music in between my segments. I segment it off. I talk about, local news. I talk about what's happening, upcoming events. I just have a great time because it's my show. And believe it or not, when you love what you do, you will wake up to do it. And I wake up, I've done this show. Robert, my mom passed last year on January 5th. It was a Thursday. I did my show. She passed at 5:15, 10 o'clock. I was on the air live. Now I was a mess because I lost her, but I did the show because I'm passionate about it. And she listened to my show every day. So I knew she would have wanted me to do my show, and I did. So, it's all about you. When I'm traveling, I'm freaking out because I'm trying to get, I went to a horse farm in 2020. Was it 20? Yeah, it was 20. They had the worst internet ever. I'm talking about, I was like, oh my God. I went to a ranch. I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. So I'm on there. I had very sketchy internet, but guess what I did? I explained to my listeners, I'm on a ranch. The internet is horrible. You may hear me for a second. Now, I didn't go long because I didn't want to bore them, but I wanted them to know that I was still thinking about them, and I still want to come to them just to say hello, even though my internet was awful. And I did that. So it's being in love with what you do for me. So I love what I do. And so I do it no matter what.
And you're reminding me that maybe a couple of years ago, I was interviewing a podcaster, and we were talking about this subject of, sometimes you don't feel like showing up, right? Or sometimes you think, wouldn't it be easier if I just stayed in bed today and didn't show up to that meeting or didn't do that podcast? And the person said, well, what if you were a surgeon? And what if there was some surgery scheduled and you had to fix someone's brain or fix someone's heart or something, and you just said, oh, I don't feel like showing up today? It's like, other people are depending on you in some way, whether that's listening to your podcast. And there's something to be said about the familiarity, the regularity, especially even for yourself, right? Like your own talk therapy in a way, doing your own podcast, where if you have a bad day or you have these bad life events, well, at least you have these things that you know are true, that can happen, things that are within your control, and you can control. And you might only be at 78% of your full self, but you can still show up and you can still do your best with what you have.
And that's absolutely true. When last year my mom passed, we all had COVID. We all got COVID right around Christmas. Like my granddaughter went to daycare, and someone exposed her, and she exposed the whole family. Like we had did so well up until that point. And the baby went to daycare, and they called my daughter on December 18th saying, hey, someone in the school has it, but they weren't in her class. Well, somebody exposed her, and she came home, and Christmas Day, she exposed us all. By the 27th, we were all sick. And I had something going on with my lungs. I thought I wasn't going to make it, Robert. I couldn't breathe. My husband had to take care of me. And then my mom went into the hospital. I never saw her again on the 27th. And then that 5th, I was still sick. And I was just, when I tell you, tired, just like lethargic and just broken, just from being sick and from losing her. But I did it anyway, and sometimes you just have to push past all the things that get in your way. And that's what successful people do. They push past that stuff, even when they don't want to. There are plenty of days I get up and like, oh God, I don't feel like getting up. but I get up anyway. And I say to myself, somebody is waiting for their horoscope today. Somebody is waiting for me to get on there and act silly today. Somebody needs that today. And I get up and I do it.
And that's interesting that even if maybe and like if you find the motivation where you can find it, right? And even if you personally think, well, if I'm just in my own head and I'm thinking, well, I can't get motivated. Well, think about the other people who are expecting you or who can be helped by you, that if you need to step up to make that happen. And so early on in our conversation here, you were mentioning the Chamber of Commerce, which is that kind of interests me because a bunch of years ago, I went and I attended a Chamber of Commerce and I didn't get a lot out of it. I sat down there, maybe 5 or 10 people in the room and a few local business owners. And I think we exchanged a few business cards and some people asked me what I do. And I thought to myself, I'm not even really sure like why I'm here. But then ever since that, I've been kind of daydreaming. And even as you were mentioning about the Chamber of Commerce, I'm thinking like, man, if I went back and if I had a conversation with this or that business owner, or like got 1 or 2 people scheduled for my podcast later and just like recurringly showed up again, that could be a cool way to build those relationships. But then I find myself like putting obstacles in my way and thinking like, well, is it, since it's like kind of post-COVID or sort of near the end of it, but in the middle, is it still Zoom? Is it still in person? So do people have these thoughts, or have you heard of any of this, of just the Chamber of Commerce hesitation, but also wanting to do it?
Well, I can tell you how I'm working with the chamber, and it is pretty lucrative. So what I did was, because the chamber president, I met him because he was a guest on my show. And because I know the value that I could bring to the chamber members, I said, listen, why don't we do this? Why don't you take my services and bake them into your membership? So when it was time for them to redo their memberships, now when you become a member of the chamber, you get to be on the chamber's podcast that I run for the chamber. So every member that comes in the door, I get a cut of the membership, and their content go on the chamber's platform. So, and that's because now they don't have to start one if they don't want to, but they do get an interview on and so the chamber's podcast is called Chamber Chat. And I host Chamber Chat. Now, what's funny about that, Robert, is that it's a part of the membership package that they get. Nobody really utilizes it. That's the crazy part. They pay for it, but they don't. Hey, I want to do your interview for you. That's weird. So I'm thinking, well, why is it that they're not taking advantage of something that they paid for already? Which is fine by me, because I'm here. We have a partnership, the chamber on myself, my company, so it works out for us. And whenever they decide to come on and sit down with me and talk about their business, we will take that interview and we'll put it on the Chamber Chat podcast.
Interesting.
So that's how I've been able to leverage the chamber.
And it sounds almost like a gym membership, right? Where so many people pay and only 10% actually use it, and it's always there for you. You can use it whenever you want to, but for some mysterious reason, like such a huge percentage don't take action, but you have it there for if they need it. So that's a cool idea, the having it baked in. And I can imagine that your imagination might even run wild, because you can think, well, I can make this connection as part of the baked in chamber deal, but that person I meet might lead to other things. And you can even maybe go to the neighboring towns and say, well, look, I run the podcast for this chamber. I noticed that your chamber doesn't have a podcast. Let me just repeat the offer for them as well. So listening to your answer here, I guess what's going on in my head is I'm thinking, okay, I need to figure out a way for the upside to far outweigh the possible downside, right? If I have the hesitation or all these little reasons why I don't have time for it or I can't do it, I need to be thinking of look at what Audrey's accomplished and look at how she's got this really cool deal that's lead to all these things. I need to say, isn't that weigh 1,000 pounds versus my little tiny excuses weigh like 10 pounds?
Yeah, because for me, it was like, okay, I can go to a million networking events and try to connect with one person at a time, or I can do this partnership where they're connecting to the people and they just bring them to me. Like to put that in perspective, just for the month of March, I think they had 25 new members coming to the chamber. That's 25 new members that I have to just talk to, and they give me a check. So it works for me. I didn't have to find them, but it works for the business owner as well, because now once they say, yes, Audrey, I want to sit down, we take that episode and we syndicate it. They get a copy of the MP3 and the MP4, and we syndicated across all platforms like Noise Media Network, which is my company. We partnered with the chamber. We built them out a TV channel on my network, which is distributed on Roku and Amazon Fire and Android and Apple TV. So they get the whole package. So when they sit down, we do an interview like you and I are doing. They get the audio, they get the video, they can take it and put it wherever they want to, but then it goes on the Chamber's TV channel, which is called GCC-TV. So in the Chamber Chat podcast, so we give them a lot of exposure. I think some of them are still very afraid to be on camera. And so they have not conquered that fear yet. But once they decide to do it, the service is there. For me, it's a win-win because I'm not chasing customers. I have one client with many customers. And the good thing about that, they can always come back if they got something that they need to add to the network. So let's say, for instance, they got an event coming up and they want to syndicate a video about the event across the network. Well, we have ad packages just for that goes across the network. So even after they do the interview, they can still put an ad on the Chamber's TV channel because we have packages for that I created as a part of my partnership with them.
Well, amazing. And you have so much figured out. And I always forget there's always such a long list of all these channels where you could be that we always forget, like, oh yeah, Roku, I can be on Roku, I can be on Amazon Video. And it's like, if you try to sit down and make a list of all these places where you could be, by the time you finish writing the list, it would probably be one or two that would pop up. I mean, it's amazing. You can literally be everywhere. And I want to, in a minute here, talk about the Noise Media Network and who it's for and what makes it stand out. But one thing I want to fit in here near the end here is, when you do these podcast interviews with these local business owners, what do you talk about? Do you talk about like their leadership in business and the community, or talk about their origin story, or is it like a mix? Like, what's usually the discussion with some of these businesses where they themselves might be wondering, like, well, what would you even say in a podcast?
Well, I pretty much asked them about their business, how they got started, why they got started. So their origin story. I spotlight some of the great things they may be doing now. What I will tell you is that in the beginning, I talked more to local government officials versus podcasters. That's why it opened up so many doors for me. So later on, I started talking more to business owners. And now I talk to business owners, not just locally, but business owners outside of my area, because I feel like, well, I know a lot of amazing people who have a lot to share. Let me bring them in. So my show is called Good Morning Gwinnett, about people in places around Gwinnett County and beyond, because I know I'm going to talk to some great people that don't live in Gwinnett County. And so, but it's always the origin story. How did you start? Why did you start? What advice do you have to give? Because I feel like that's going to give you the inspiration that you need. You may be thinking, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to talk about, but I always do that. And what I don't do, and some people ask you, hey, send me 4 questions. I don't do that. And I've had people that won't do my show because they want to send me questions to ask. I'm like, no, you don't have to send that. I'm gonna ask the questions I want to ask because I don't want it to sound rehearsed. So I don't accept questions. And I've had people say, well, I don't want to do your show. And I'm like, okay, it's cool. Because in my mind, Robert, I'm thinking, if you know your stuff, you know your stuff. If you know your business, you know your business. So I'm not going to be trying to trick you. I'm going to ask you questions about what you say you know. And so, but I've had people who won't do the show because they can't send me questions. So.
But there's plenty of fish in the sea, and that it's an idea that has been in these last few years with things like Tinder and Uber has been like really brought to light, that if you don't click with this person, there's so many more out there. So why would you waste your time trying to please them or change yourself or make all these accommodations when you can just go to someone else? I mean, this is the day and age when you meet with someone on a Zoom call, you do a discovery type of thing. Either they want to buy or you move on to the next person if it's not a right fit. So why should it not be that same way with podcasting? And I mean, I wish I'd known that as a kid, right? As a teenager, all these little things that I used to always be stressing about this job interview or going on this date. I should have just been like, I'll do my best. I'll give it my all. But if it doesn't work out, then there's so many more things ahead of me, so many more things that are coming. And it seems to take a lot of the pressure off, especially with podcasting, with showing up. I'm sure with your speaking from the stage, it's like if it's not 100% perfect, you'll have another chance for perfection tomorrow.
Let me tell you, 100% perfect. So was it last year? it was year before last, I think it was. I had to speak at Podfest. And so they asked me to speak to editors of all people. Like, well, I don't want to talk to editors. I don't edit my podcast. But I took the call anyway. And so the reason the guy asked me to speak on editing at the editing conference at Podfest was because I had told him that I had to do a seminar on a ship, on a cruise. And he said, and I told him that they paid for me to go on this cruise. And that was my first time cruising. And I've never cruised because all of my friends would go on cruises, but they would always go between August and October, which is hurricane season. I'm like, I'm not going on a cruise in hurricane season. So this company paid me to come on a cruise and speak. It was in September. And I was like, oh God, I gotta go because they paid for the cruise. I gotta go. So he wanted me to come to the editors conference at Podfest to talk about how do I get people to pay for me to come on a cruise. And I was like, so I'm sitting up there, Robert, and I'm telling the story about, me being empathetic because this is who I am, and I'm holding the hands of the people and I'm talking to the people. And it was a room full of guys, which was so funny. It had to be about 4 women. It was about 25 people and 4 of those were women and the rest were men. And I said, listen, I know some of you are probably looking at me saying, I don't have time to be empathetic. I said, then hire somebody to be empathetic because this is how I get some of the jobs that I get because of me being an empathetic person. So this guy comes up to me and he literally lives in my backyard. He says, he has a very thick Southern accent. He says, Audrey, I got to tell you, that was a great presentation, but I don't have time to be empathetic. And I said, I know. That's why I said, hire somebody. Now, all the women came up. They were like, oh, it was great. I love it. They loved it. The rest of the guys were like, whatever, ma'am. I'm not trying to be empathetic. So, you have to find out what's good for you. Like for me, I'm an empathetic person. I talk to a lot of people who are afraid of the microphone. They're afraid of the camera. They're afraid of technology. They think everything is when you say technology, if you say turn the computer on, oh my God, I don't know how to do that. I take the time and I'll hold their hands. Not a lot of people do that, Robert. I have a friend, she's an attorney and she has a big branding company. And she's like, I don't work with startups. And I was like, why? She's because I don't have time to hold them and baby them. She won't work with them. She will not work with a startup. So, so that's a gap for people like me who don't mind working with startups, who don't mind holding their hands, whether they're trying to start a podcast or start a business. I don't mind being the one to hold their hands.
And we all have those skills that we ourselves take for granted, right? Think and Grow Rich calls it specialized knowledge, where it's easy for you, but it's hard for others. So then the gap exists so that way you can jump in there and you can fulfill a need and you can take a business that is really struggling and it's broken and make it really work, or maybe not even business, local government or someone, a candidate running for office. There's these people out there that there's some sort of skill. It could be the hand holding, the empathy. It could be the technology skill. It could be the podcast editing. Who knows what it is? It's out there and we need to fill that gap. And in order to fill that gap, people need to be known. In order to be known, they need to be on a podcast and they need to be everywhere thanks to your help. So could you tell us about Noise Media Network and the services that you provide and what you can do for people?
Yeah. So, strangely enough, you mentioned technology. So just last night I was late too, and I was like trying to get this done. So I get a text message from a young man who's a campaign manager for a local community leader who's running for Congress. And he was like, listen, we got until May 24th to get this message to as many people in her district as possible, which was a little bit over 100,000 people. And I said to him, okay, so my company is now offering something called geofencing. And so I had to throw together a proposal like really, really quick and send it to him so he can send it to her. And she was amazed. She just thought that was amazing. So Noise is a media and marketing company. And what I tell people is I help you get massive exposure. So whether you want to be on TV, on Apple and Android and Fire Stick and Roku, or you want to be on Tubi or Pluto or Peacock, I can get you on those platforms. And so I help take away the what's the word I'm looking for? I help take away that whole fear of being out there. I help take away the fear of, I don't know how to work this. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to call. And so, if you want to be on a podcast, if you want to launch a podcast, like I have a client, she does not want to talk on a podcast. Well, guess what I do? Well, I tell her, listen, I can use AI to generate your podcast for you. Now it's going to sound like a robot. It's not going to sound like a human being, but at least you have a podcast. She doesn't want to talk on a podcast. So we take AI and we create content based off of her website and we create a podcast for her. She still has a podcast out there. It sounds, robotic somewhat, but she has a podcast. And so we help business owners and political leaders and community leaders get as much exposure as possible. The one thing you and I both know about podcasting and streaming TV is that you can be in 130 companies in a matter of a minute. So a lot of people don't know that. They think that, I'm just local. Now, granted, my podcast, Good Morning Gwinnett, is hyper local because it's about Gwinnett County where I live, but it's syndicated globally. So because I'm here in Gwinnett County does not mean I can't be global. And so one of the countries that listen to my podcast the most is Vietnam. And I was like, every time I look at my stats, I'm like, why Vietnam? Right. And so someone said to me, Audrey, that's because they want to know our culture and you are talking about where you live in the culture. And I was like, oh, okay. So when I looked at my stats, I see Vietnam as one of the places that, I'm very popular. I was in a meeting one day and I want to say I was ranked number 3 on news in Australia. I'm like, what? So because I talk about the news about what's happening. So, it's exposure that you can get, even if you don't want to launch a podcast or a TV network. There are plenty of us out there right now. Like when I first started in streaming TV, it was only a few of us, and I don't think it was too many Black folk, right? I was one of the first ones out there with these type of platforms. Now it's open to anybody. If you go to Alexa and say, Alexa, open Good Morning Gwinnett, it's going to play the most recent episode of my podcast because artificial intelligence just keeps getting smarter. And so, we have all these technologies at our disposal, but I think for a lot of people, Robert, it's trying to figure out exactly how can they leverage it, because it can become very overwhelming, and especially if you're not like a person like you and I who like technology. Like you like technology, I do too, but that person who's like, oh my God, I just want to turn the computer on, it can become very overwhelming. So I try to take all of the overwhelm out by providing these services at a very affordable price and at ease. So if you need these things, come to us. We just do everything for you. So yeah, that's what we do.
Well, fantastic. What's the website?
Noisemedia.us.
Noisemedia.us. And there's so much in there. I wish we had time to unpack like the 37 or so things, because we're both a couple of podcasters. We could easily talk for 3 hours straight and go back and forth and talk about this and that. But what comes to mind is just that you wouldn't build your own house unless you were really skilled, right? You wouldn't put together your own car. It's nice to be able to use that thing and get to where you need to go and enjoy the benefits of it. But if you tried to milk your own cow and pump your own water, you'd run out of time of your whole life just trying to get these things. So why not take the shortcut? Why not go to someone like Audrey Kearney, who knows how to get you to where you need to go, and who can, like we said about the hand holding, she can work with you where if you're not quite there and you say, well, I can't be on video yet, well, then you can record the audio and put it on YouTube with just a blank like title card. If you are at the point where you're too afraid to even be on audio, then Audrey can work her AI magic and get a computer voice, and they're getting more and more realistic sounding to almost get there. So that way you can still get your message out and you can work your way up, and you can say, well, before I had nothing set up, but Audrey set me up on these 10 platforms, and now I'm excited to get on Pluto and get on TikTok, and then just kind of have that upward spiral of, at first I was too afraid to do anything, but I saw a little bit of a benefit, and now I'm excited to do more and do more. And it was all because you asked for help and you got someone who knows you or will know you and your business soon to get you the exposure that you need. So the URL, one more time, what was that?
Noisemedia.us.
Noisemedia.us. It was the US that messed me up, and because I'm always thinking like, oh, .com. So noisemedia.us is the place to go right now. Don't wait. Don't just write it down on a piece of paper and come back to it 3 months later. Go there right now while this podcast is still open. Noisemedia.us. And Audrey, do you have any like motivating words for someone to go to noisemedia.us like within the next like 30 seconds and not the next 30 days?
Yeah, sure. So right now, if you go to Noise Media, I love talking to entrepreneurs. I'm always looking for great stories to share. So email me, Audrey@noisemedia.us, and say, Audrey, I got a great story to share. Because one thing I realized, Robert, is that your story can help somebody else. And so my goal is to make sure that we help as many people as we possibly can to live a life that they love doing, the things that they actually love doing.
Fantastic. Your story can help somebody else. That needs to be a bumper sticker. So the email to send is Audrey@noisemedia.us. And this is your chance to see if Audrey puts her money where her mouth is, right? It's easy to say, oh, I'm accessible or I can help you. But if and when you email Audrey@noisemedia.us, see how long it takes for her to respond to you, and she'll get into a conversation, and she will deliver some of that hand holding. So send that email right now while it's still fresh on your mind. You can do it from your phone, Audrey@noisemedia.us, and we'll see you at noisemedia.us. And thank you, Audrey, for stopping by.
Thank you, Robert, so much for having me. It has been a pleasure.